I'm Elisa Parenti in New York, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Here's a check of your first word news. French President Emmanuel Macron and his wife Brigitte have arrived in the U.S. for a 3-day official state visit. Now, this is the first by any foreign leader during this administration. Macron says talks on security, trade, and multilateral issues are on their agenda. Indiana's Joe Donnelly is the third Senate Democrat now to support CIA Director Mike Pompeo's confirmation as Secretary of State. North Dakota's Heidi Heitkamp and West Virginia's Joe Manchin also declared support. A Senate vote could come as early as next week. And authorities in Toronto say the driver of a van that jumped a curb and killed at least 9 people has been taken into custody. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says investigators are still gathering information. And police say the suspect in a Tennessee Waffle House shooting on Sunday has been taken into custody. 4 people were killed in that incident. Authorities say 29-year-old Travis Reinking had a gun in his backpack when he was arrested. Bill Cosby's lawyers have rested their case now at his sexual assault retrial. The 80-year-old comedian did not take the stand. Cosby is charged with drugging and molesting a woman at his home in 2004. Global news 24 hours a day, powered on air and on TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti, and this is Bloomberg. Bloomberg Technology is next.
And this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, Alphabet reports strong numbers despite the privacy backlash that other tech giants are facing. We'll look at the Google parent's first quarter. Plus, Alexa just isn't enough for Amazon. Jeff Bezos' latest ambition to build a domestic robot for your home. We'll discuss his top secret program. And Facebook and Twitter get ready to report. We will set you up for the rest of this big week in tech as the social media giants try to keep Wall Street happy. But first to our lead. Alphabet's first quarter numbers are in. Google's parent company reporting sales of $24.9 billion, topping estimates by $600 million. Earnings per share came in at $13.33, beating the highest analyst estimates. Paid clicks jumped 55% as well, and capital expenditures for the tech giant more than tripled from $2.4 billion to $7.7 billion. For more, I want to bring in Technalysis Research President Bob O'Donnell, and with us in New York, Forrester Research Analyst Colin Colburn. Colin, I'll start with you. You know, overall, our interpretation of this is ad business there still going strong despite these privacy concerns. What's your biggest takeaway? Yeah, absolutely. A strong quarter for Google again. I think the real big takeaway here is that Google looks pretty professional compared to some of its competitors, namely Facebook, today. I think that's been pretty apparent in the way that Google's sort of not really said anything recently since the Cambridge Analytica scandal with Facebook, and sort of just sat back and said, well, this is all good news for us, I think, because we're the ones that kind of look like the big guys, the more professional tech company in this instance. I did just get off a phone call with Alphabet CFO Ruth Porat, and we asked her about future privacy regulations, how this could impact the business. You know, what she had to say about GDPR specifically, which is the new regulations coming to effect in Europe. She said, we've been working on GDPR compliance for 18 months. We had a robust and strong privacy program, and we are building on it. We do feel well prepared to meet these requirements. I asked specifically how this would impact the business, and she didn't give me a straight answer. She said, most of our ad business is search, which relies on keywords entered. We have a diverse ad business and have been committed to the requirements. So my interpretation of that, Bob, is that she's indicating it's not going to impact the business very much. What's your take? I think it will impact the business, but to be fair, search ads are different than the kinds of ads we've seen drawn by Facebook. So there is a difference to be, I'll give them that much, but clearly we're going to see some impact here. And I agree. How much? Well, that's, of course, the big question mark is how much. And I will say, yes, they are more adult-like in the manner with which they handle things, but let's be honest, there was an interesting story in the Wall Street Journal today that Chris Mims wrote on the fact that Google probably has more data on all of us than Facebook. So yes, they have
been conveniently ignoring some of these issues. But if we start to see privacy regulations come out, I think we could in some ways see Google even more impacted by those regulations. Now, their business model is more balanced. So in that regard, they may face more sanctions and yet not have as big a financial hit as perhaps Facebook might.
Now, interestingly, I asked her also about the Honest Ads Act, which is new legislation that Facebook and Twitter have said that they will support around political transparency in digital advertising. Google has been notably silent, and in fact, some lawmakers have noticed this and called on Google to state their position. I did ask her, why aren't you publicly supporting this yet? And she said, we're continuing to monitor for emerging problems and threats and putting in place new safeguards. She talked about their transparency reports, their repository of election ads. But what do you make, Colin, of the fact that Google hasn't stated their position on the Honest Ads Act and that lawmakers are asking?
Yeah, I think Google has been quiet, and I think it kind of goes back to what Bob was saying, that the majority of their ad revenue is still from search advertising, which is quite different than a lot of the other advertising that's sort of been in the headlines recently, which is social advertising, which is more of a display advertising type of ad format that targets people based on what they know explicitly about different customer segments, whereas search advertising is really revolving around keywords and terms that people are putting into Google. Yes, Google does make the search result different and will target advertising based on stuff that they know about logged in consumers, but it is quite different. So I think that's part of the reason that Google has been a little bit hesitant to say anything, and I think it also goes back to they're sort of waiting to see what comes of Facebook and Twitter from more of the social advertising scandal perspective.
We are listening into the Alphabet earnings call right now. The Q&A portion of the call is starting. Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, also on that call. What do you make of sort of the broader trends you're seeing here? She spoke to me about how the other big bets, which are cloud, YouTube, and hardware, that is really where they are investing, but also where they believe the investment is going to pay off. Yeah,
and I think they're right? I mean, I think there's a number of different areas that we can expect to see Alphabet grow their business. Obviously, even Waymo, it's not generating revenue now, but the way they're positioning Waymo, I think, is very interesting and could be very effective as people like Tesla run into certain issues.
Speaking of that, actually, we just got a quote from her on Waymo, so I want to play that, and then I'm going to have you follow up. Take a listen to what Ruth Porat just said on the call about Waymo, Google's self-driving car unit.
At Waymo, we have achieved 5 million miles of driving on city streets, adding the latest million in just 3 months. We also announced a long-term partnership with Jaguar Land Rover for their fully electric I-Pace vehicles.
Now, Waymo is really comprising a bigger portion of the other bets because they've moved Nest under the Google umbrella. So now you have basically Waymo, you have Google X, you have Fiber, and Verily. That's really all other bets are at this point. And it's a big one.
I think it is. And, right now, Verily is a small, it's the revenue that they're primarily getting a little bit from Fiber. But longer term, in terms of when we think about actual bets, I think Waymo is the most important bet. And philosophically, they've taken a very different approach in that they are not trying to do more of the semi-autonomous driving. They're trying to say, look, we know people get distracted, and we know the kinds of situations that have occurred are going to occur, and therefore we're going to wait till our technology can do the complete picture. And I think that's a very interesting philosophical difference from some of the other vendors. So bottom line is I think that's going to be a good bet for them in the long run. The other thing is I think we'll see on the compute side them be able to drive AI services, kind of like what IBM does with Watson. You can imagine Google-branded AI services as yet another cloud computing kind of service add-on that she referred to a little bit in some of the comments on the call earlier.
Colin, Ruth Porat told me that Verily and Fiber driving most of the revenue for other bets, but it's only $150 million at this point. However, the operating loss, $571 million, which may bring the Google X and Waymo investments into account. There's always been so much focus on these other bets since Google started breaking them out. But I wonder if that will be less and less now that the pie essentially is getting smaller.
Yeah, I think Google does focus a lot less on some of the other bets primarily because it is so small compared to its main revenue driver. The advertising revenue is still pretty high margin for them. They are the dominator there, and it will be interesting to see. This quarter didn't reflect too much of the scandal, of the Cambridge Analytica scandal with Facebook, since there was only about 2 weeks that we were able to look at. It'll be interesting to see next quarter. Are they growing the ad revenue pie even more as advertisers start to rethink, should I be placing my bets in a place like Facebook, or should I be going to somewhere that actually looks a little bit better to me and a little bit more trustworthy in a Google? So that'll be interesting to look at in the coming quarters.
Interesting, Bob. Would you agree that Facebook's loss could be Google's gain?
Potentially, but I'm not convinced. I think in general we're going to see a lot of advertisers kind of rethink where they're going. Now, admittedly, obviously there's YouTube as well, so there are different places
and
where...
YouTube is facing some similar challenges in terms of what what kind of content advertisers are advertising against, and they don't necessarily want to be associated with white nationalism or terrorism.
I mean, I think in general we're going to see a lot of rethinking. At the same time, advertisers are realizing, look, if we want to reach people, these are the platforms. How can we drive changes in those platforms, perhaps? That's what they're certainly trying to do with YouTube. I think that's what you'll see them try to do a little bit more with Facebook and Google. But again, the regulation issues become a big issue. How Google interprets GDPR, and will they bring it to the U.S.? We've seen Facebook kind of moving away from doing that. If they start to take GDPR standards as a worldwide standard, which some companies have done, that clearly is going to be an important difference as well. But again, there's a trust issue that I think is going to play out over not just months, but more like quarters and years.
Right. And Colin,
just one thing I do want to say there. If there is anyone that's sort of looming in the background, it's Amazon. Amazon is the company that is really growing their advertising business very quietly, and they have nothing to say here because they don't really break out advertising revenue at all in their statements. But they might be the one that actually gains even more than a Google does with Facebook in mind.
Well, and Google is in the lead. Then it's Facebook, and I mean, Amazon is a very
they are
right?
small. It's only about, I mean, estimates are $2 billion last year that Amazon captured in advertising revenue. But we've spoken with a number of CPG marketers that are listing their products on Amazon and are increasing their spend on Amazon as much as 60% year over year. And they are also offering Amazon Advertising Platform, which is their demand side platform, their ability to buy display advertising on Amazon, but also on sites off of Amazon that advertisers can use. Basically, a competitor to Google's DoubleClick. And as people start to look at that as an interesting way to say, hey, we can actually use Amazon's behavioral and purchase data that they have on consumers to target them in other places outside of just Amazon, then you can start to see people like a BMW or a Bank of America, who can't even list products on Amazon, obviously, today, start using Amazon more as an advertising platform.
All right, and one other number I do want to highlight. Because of a change in accounting standards, Alphabet now has to report its gain on its own investments like Uber, investments like Lyft, and we know that those investments, the gain was valued at $3.3 billion. Of course, they invested in Uber at a $4 billion valuation in 2013, $260 million, and obviously the value of Uber has skyrocketed. Colin Colburn, Forrester Research, thank you so much, as well as Technalysis President Bob O'Donnell. Appreciate it. We're going to continue to bring you any headlines from this call throughout the hour. Now to a stock we are watching. Shares of Facebook dipping in Monday trading as Jeffrey Gundlach, the CIO of Double Line Capital, recommended shorting the social media giant. The fund manager pointed to equity bubbles, saying they are often popped by regulation and that, quote, interpretations matter when looking at Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg's apology over the recent controversies surrounding users' personal data. Gundlach made these headlines from the Sohn conference in New York. John Pfeffer of Pfeffer Capital also made some news there, calling Bitcoin the first viable candidate to replace gold. He also said Bitcoin could rise to $700,000. Coming up, Amazon has taken over homes with Alexa. Are full-blown robots up next? Details on Amazon's top secret plan next. This is Bloomberg. Amazon is working on yet another big bet, robots for the home. According to people familiar with the matter, Amazon has embarked on a top secret plan to build a domestic robot. Amazon hopes to begin putting robots in employees' homes by the end of the year. A rollout for customers in 2019 could follow. Here with more on the story, Bloomberg Tech Senior Executive Editor Brad Stone and Bloomberg Tech's Mark Gurman. So many questions. What will they look like? What will they do? How much easier will my life be?
And the answer to many of those is we don't know. What we do know is that there is a top secret project, no longer top secret, called Vesta inside Lab 126. Lab 126 is the hardware division of Amazon based here in Silicon Valley down in Sunnyvale. People familiar with the project tell us that it is sort of, you could think of it like a mobile Alexa, so Amazon's voice activated assistant, but on a mobile robot, something that perhaps can be a companion, a little bit of a domestic servant. This is something the tech industry has been dreaming about for decades, and of course no one's really pulled it off.
Right, and companies have tried. What does Amazon have? What sort of unique edge does Amazon have that would make this any different?
Well, first of all, Amazon as a company has a lot of experience in robotics in general because of their work inside of warehouses. They bought a company for about $800 million a few years ago, Kiva, based in Massachusetts and Germany, working on this. They also have some of the world's top scientists in computer vision, which is a technology that self-driving cars use in order to navigate roads. Now they're going to be bringing that to that robot. So they're pretty well established and prepared to go down this road.
And if this could be in employees' homes by the end of the year, does this mean Amazon is pretty far along?
I think so. I mean, they've been working on this for a couple of years. What we noticed on the Lab 126 jobs page is that they are hiring very rapidly mechanical engineers, optical engineers. So the project is ramping up now. I don't suspect that we will see anything on the market in 2018, but certainly the optimistic projection is sometimes next year.
Is this something, I mean, the concern is always, will this replace workers? Will this replace jobs? Could that happen now?
That's a good question. I think that in terms of the Kiva robots that we talked about a minute ago, yes. But in terms of this consumer home solution, I don't really think so. This is not something that's going to replace anyone's tasks. This is going to be an Echo, something that follows you around, probably to sell you more Amazon products and such, being able to go with you into rooms where you normally wouldn't have an Echo. And one of the really cool use cases potentially is video conferencing. Right now they have the Echo Show and this new Alexa video conferencing system, but it's not mobile. You have to put it where it is. It's plugged in by your counter or in your kitchen. Now imagine being able to be followed around with a video chat camera. That's something that the industry's been playing with.
It's a little, it sounds a little terrifying, to be honest. Will Alexa be playing a role here? Obviously, Alexa has been learning a lot. Amazon has been learning a lot via Alexa about what we want and need. What is the role that Alexa will play?
We don't know for sure, but it certainly makes sense that this new Vesta robot would have Alexa on board. But the technology does need to advance. Alexa's not very conversational. I think the holy grail for all technology companies is to create a robot that's really a companion. The Japanese electronics companies have been thinking about this for a long time, and they see it as a kind of elder care companion or a way to solve the problem of an aging population in places like Japan. And so, if Amazon's looking at that same problem, you can see a version of Alexa, when they make it more conversational, as being useful for the robot.
And what's the competition here? I mean, we've been using Google Home a little bit more, and actually sometimes Google Home is better than Alexa and is more informative. Where are the other tech giants on home robots?
Yeah, that's a good question. In terms of the tech giants, we know Google has their, Google X, their Alphabet X labs. They've been playing with this sort of stuff for years. Apple hasn't really talked about robots or anything like that, but LG and Sony, companies in Asia, they've been playing with robots more recently. Sony announced an $1,800 robotic dog that plays soccer and barks. And by the way, $1,800 is like the price of a real dog, so you might as well get one of those. And LG as well showed them off at CES. Neither of the demos were that impressive. Amazon is really trying to come in here and
SoftBank has its Pepper robot too, which is rolled out to SoftBank stores in Japan. So lots of different.
What does Pepper do?
Well, right now Pepper doesn't do much. It is a sort of companion and greeter in a lot of SoftBank stores, and they're trying to get it into the home.
I've seen it on display. All right, Brad Stone, Mark Gurman of Bloomberg Technology, thank you both. Coming up, French President Emmanuel Macron comes to Washington. We're going to head to Europe to discuss. This is Bloomberg. French President Emmanuel Macron arrived in Washington Monday for the start of a three-day visit where security and trade are likely at the top of the agenda. This as President Trump threatens to upend the global trading system with tariffs on China and maybe Europe as well, and ditch the Iran nuclear accord. 40-year-old French President Macron has been building bridges not only with President Trump since he came to office a year ago, but also with U.S. technology companies. Caroline Hyde is standing by to explain France's rather complicated relationship with technology. Caroline, remind us what the stakes are here.
Yeah, the stakes are pretty high when it comes to Macron because, of course, this is a man who wanted to talk of a startup nation when he hit the campaign trail. And remember, he was only elected just under a year ago now. He really was talking of redefining France in a business perspective, trying to make it seem innovative, a good place to come and set up shop if you're a startup. So notably, Emmanuel Macron has been really trying to build that perspective, cut red tape, make it cheaper to do business, cut your taxes if you're a wealthy individual, and investing in startups in particular. And they've had some innovative ways of bringing in more technology talent. And I understand we can be, of course, looking at Macron and Trump as we speak. Emily.
All right, Caroline, we are actually looking at live pictures of the White House now. President Trump and the First Lady, French President Emmanuel Macron arriving, shaking hands with President Trump ahead of this very, very important 3-day visit. Caroline, you know, Kevin Cirilli, actually, we're going to go to our chief Washington correspondent who is standing by right now. Kevin, walk us through the agenda for the next 3 days.
Hey, Emily. So President Macron just right now meeting with President Trump. He arrived earlier here at Andrews Air Force Base. He spoke to reporters, said he was looking forward to a series of trade meetings about a host of issues ranging from the Iran nuclear deal as well as the economic ties between France and the United States. He then went to the Blair House, a very historic house located across the street from the White House, before arriving here at the White House. Now, from here, the symbolism will continue. He will plant a tree with President Trump that the White House says is signifying the relationship between France and the United States. Then the two world leaders will board Marine One, the President Trump's helicopter, of the United States helicopter, rather. They will tour the monuments in that helicopter before traveling to Mount Vernon, a short distance away in Virginia, where they will visit the gravesite of President George Washington, of course, the first president of the United States. From there, then, that's when this private one-on-one time, the discussions on trade, on the economic ties, on Iran, really are likely to come up. Tomorrow, the president will host a state dinner for President Macron, the first state dinner of this administration. First Lady Melania Trump playing a key role on that particular point. And then on Wednesday, President Macron will address a joint session of Congress. Now, from the administration's perspective, they're noting all of the joint economic ties, Emily, that the two countries have.
Kevin Cirilli, our chief Washington correspondent, thank you so much. French President Emmanuel Macron has just arrived at the White House and is now speaking with President Trump. Thank you so much, Kevin. We will bring you more headlines as we have them throughout the show. Coming up, we're going to be talking about Twitter and Facebook, their earnings later this week. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Mark Crumpton in New York. You're watching Bloomberg Technology. Here's a check of First Word News. French President Emmanuel Macron and his wife Brigitte have arrived at the White House to kick off a 3-day state visit, the first by any foreign leader during the Trump administration. President Macron says talks on security, trade, and multilateral issues are on the agenda. A Senate Foreign Relations Committee confirmation hearing is underway for Mike Pompeo, President Trump's nominee for Secretary of State. At least 3 Democrats have officially come out in support of the former CIA director. Senators Joe Manchin, Heidi Heitkamp, and Joe Donnelly say they'll vote for Pompeo. Republican holdout Rand Paul is now on board. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says a retreat in Sweden with members of the deeply divided Security Council had cooled down tensions over Syria. He stressed that all 15 council members fully support a political solution.
The most difficult thing has been the question, as you know, of accountability in relation to chemical weapons attacks. There has been, until now, no possibility to come to an agreement in relation to a mechanism of attribution of these responsibilities for accountability to be possible.
Guterres added there was no solution to the dispute between Russia and many council members, including all Western nations, over a new body to determine responsibility for chemical weapons attacks in Syria. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. It's just after 5:30 p.m. here in New York, 7:30 Tuesday morning in Sydney, where my colleague Paul Allen has a look at the markets. Paul, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. Well, there's a mixed finish on Wall Street on Monday evening. Let's have a look at how things shook down. The Dow was a little weaker. We had the S&P up very modestly. The Nasdaq weaker as well. Alphabet, of course, reporting beats for earnings per share and revenue, with ad momentum remaining strong. So how are we shaping up in this part of the world? Well, it's looking pretty quiet for futures, looking quite flat. ASX futures and Nikkei futures traded out of Chicago, both just a little higher. The Aussie dollar weakening against the US, closing in on 76 cents. The Japanese yen also weaker as the dollar strengthens, and that 10-year nudges 3% yield. Take a look at commodities. Aluminium's where the action is, really slumping on the news that Rusal sanctions may be loosened. Other base metals lower as well. Oil closing in on about $69. And later on today, we'll have Aussie CPI. I'm Paul Allen in Sydney. More from Bloomberg Technology next.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Back to our top story. Alphabet's first quarter. Google's digital ad business generated robust growth in the first quarter while spending surged. The results suggest the company has so far shrugged off a privacy backlash against internet companies and their data-heavy ad targeting businesses. We've been monitoring the call with investors. Here's CEO Sundar Pichai talking about the cloud business.
Cloud is continuing its great growth. We are seeing it across the board. Things worth I would call out is we are seeing larger deals as well. We are seeing good synergies between G Suite and cloud. The areas where we have done acquisitions like Apigee, they are beginning to work in terms of driving synergies to cloud.
For more, I want to bring in Mark Bergen, who covers Alphabet for Bloomberg Technology. So, Mark, we're always looking for more color on YouTube, cloud, hardware, the big bets that Google is investing in. Are we getting any more information about how much these are actually contributing to growth?
Not much. I mean, we saw that their other revenues line, where all those units are sort of thrown in the same bucket, grew pretty well, significantly, like over 40% this past quarter. Sundar and Ruth Porat, the CFO, both mentioned cloud and hardware and YouTube as key drivers of growth. But unfortunately, unlike last quarter where we got our first disclosures about cloud revenue, there was nothing new this quarter to share.
So, talk to us about the highlights as you see them. I mean, overall, it seems, the ad business still doing well despite these privacy concerns. We were speaking with some analysts earlier who suggested that, Facebook could really feel the brunt of this, and Facebook's loss could be Google's gain.
Yeah, I mean, they spent a lot of time talking about how they've been prepared for over 18 months around GDPR, the privacy regulation out of Europe. Sundar made this really interesting comment about how Google's business is primarily around search, and that's, all they're taking in is keywords. He didn't mention that they have this multi-billion-dollar display business that does a lot of ad targeting, very similar to Facebook. I think the big takeaway here for investors was the spending. If you look at CapEx, it more than doubled. They talked about how it was, they spent $2.4 billion on real estate in Chelsea Market this quarter. But they also mentioned that they're investing deeply in their cloud and data centers and a lot of this machine learning technology. And they said that that's not going to stop. So they're going to keep spending quite heavily on Google.
That said, it was also pointed out earlier that Google may have far more information about us than Facebook does. So has Google just been, quietly avoiding the limelight? And could they feel the brunt if regulation or more legislation moves forward?
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people are saying in D.C. Right? This is not any legislation is not going to be Facebook legislation. It's going to be across the industry, and it's obviously going to address Google. Google has put in place, and they've dealt with this issues for longer than Facebook. They said on the call today that we are always talking about trust and safety of our users, and clearly Google's interest is to make sure that their users feel safe using the product, and they don't want to disparage that name. But it's likely that they're going to have to deal with any privacy and regulatory issues that Facebook deals with.
Okay, Mark Bergen covers Alphabet for us. Thank you so much, Mark, for that update. I know you'll keep listening in. Now that Alphabet's earnings are out, tech insiders are gearing up for the two other big names reporting this week. Facebook and Twitter will be out with their numbers Wednesday. Twitter first up, 8 a.m. Eastern, with Facebook following after the closing bell. To give us a taste of what is to come, I want to bring in Bloomberg Technology, Sarah Fryer and Selena Wang, who cover Facebook and Twitter. So we didn't see a big impact on Alphabet. Will we, Sarah, see an impact from this Cambridge Analytica scandal and more on Facebook's numbers?
Now, that scandal hit in March, but people are going to be looking at some changes that Facebook made even earlier in anticipation of these content problems, of the issues with people seeing things on their site like fake news. And so they tweaked their newsfeed algorithm in January to emphasize more from people, friends and family, as opposed to news and pages. And we should be able to see the impact of that in this quarter. Is that affecting engagement? Is that affecting ad revenue? We're not sure yet. And then there's another aspect of this, which is engagement. Facebook users are spending less time on Facebook, and that's a huge issue if it's not by Facebook's own design.
Twitter shares were also dragged down as a result of what was happening at Facebook. Selena, how much of an impact will we see at Twitter from the sort of ancillary privacy concerns that if they affect Facebook, they likely also affect Twitter?
Twitter has managed to mostly stay out of the limelight because of the way that the platform is created. It's already public by nature, so most of the data that they are selling to third-party services, to advertisers, is already publicly available anyways. However, lawmakers are calling for Jack Dorsey and the Google CEO to go to Capitol Hill and testify. There will probably be questions from analysts around what's going to be the impact of GDPR. How are they responding to the Cambridge Analytica scandal, and how are they maybe going to adjust their developer policies and advertise policies as a result of what happened to Facebook? However, they have mostly been shielded from a lot of the issues that Facebook faced. And on one of the days of Zuckerberg's testimonies, we actually saw Twitter shares increase. So there was some potentially positive tailwind to Twitter as a result of what happened to Facebook.
Well, Facebook shares also increased because Mark Zuckerberg seemed to be doing well, but also, let's be honest, the questions weren't that great. Sarah, what are investors saying at this point? We spoke to Mark Mahaney of RBC Capital Markets last week, who said he thinks that this is just going to be a blip for Facebook.
Yeah, he sees it as a
size. People aren't going to leave because they really can't get that size of an audience anywhere else.
Mahaney sees this as sort of a PR crisis, and a lot of investors are in that same camp. And in some ways, it is because it's a trust crisis. I mean, this is a problem with users feeling like they can't trust Facebook with their data. But remember that it's not just Facebook. Facebook owns Instagram, they own WhatsApp, they own Messenger, they own all these other properties that can contribute to that bottom line and that advertising revenue.
But Facebook is the moneymaker, right?
Facebook is by far the moneymaker. So the number one question we're going to see from investors is, are people still coming to Facebook? Has there been a significant decrease in the amount of time people spent on Facebook? And can Facebook come out and say that that was their decision to try to, remember in the prior quarter, they said that they saw 50 minutes fewer per day on Facebook spent by people because they were trying to shield them from viral video and fake news, and it was for their own benefit. What if it's not by Facebook's design, and what if people just don't want to be on Facebook anymore? That's what investors will be digging into and trying to make sure that any of these changes in behavior on Facebook, that's what advertisers care about. The more time people spend there, the more data they give to Facebook, the more information that advertisers have, and the more context around their ads.
Now, Selena, give us some context on what we're expecting around Twitter. regarding, re-accelerating user growth, engagement, and, how this will all play out as a result of their live streaming strategy.
Sentiment has really been improving for Twitter. The idea was that they had a really rough past few years, but they're now really truly stabilizing. Revenue is expected to accelerate. Daily active user growth has been accelerating for several quarters. That's expected to continue. And a lot of that is really because of Jack Dorsey's emphasis on artificial intelligence to really personalize the platform. So it's no longer a chronological feed. It's trying to feed you the most important and relevant information to you. Live streaming's also been a great benefit to them. We're seeing video advertising grow as their main category of revenue growth. Advertisers love live streaming. It's a premium way to get their branded messaging into a more natural environment. It also is more expensive, which is better for Twitter's top line. They're also really starting to find their own niche in the live streaming world. Facebook obviously has Facebook Watch. They've poured a ton of money to it, but Twitter's really trying to say, we have a different strategy here. We're not trying to directly compete with TV like what YouTube and Facebook and Hulu and Netflix are doing. We're trying to be that second screen that's able to sort of provide an augmented experience to what's already happening on TV.
All right, Selena Wang, Sarah Fryer, I know you will bring us updates throughout the week. Thank you so much for stopping by. Okay, another stock we are watching. Box shares surged the most in over 3 years after Chamath Palihapitiya said investors are interested in tapping into artificial intelligence should go long on the stock. Speaking at the Stone Conference in New York, the Social Capital CEO said Box is incredibly cheap and undervalued. This is Box's biggest intraday increase since January 2015. Coming up, should Facebook employ more people to stop dodgy ads? Why the company's automated ad model may not be the brightest strategy next. This is Bloomberg. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg is in hot water yet again. Martin Lewis, founder of the popular UK personal finance website MoneySavingExpert.com, says he is suing Facebook for defamation over dozens of unauthorized advertisements that use images of him. Facebook asks users to report the ads and promises to take them down. Lewis says he does exactly that, yet they show up repeatedly. Bloomberg Gadfly's Alex Webb says the problem lies at the heart of Facebook's business model. Handling of pretty much all its ads is automated. He joins us now from London. So Alex, tell us a little bit more about this lawsuit.
So there was a great story in Business Week a few weeks ago which talked about sort of slightly dodgy companies who use often third-party images. They might use someone from Shark Tank, for instance, to promote their products on the Facebook platform. And this guy in the UK, Martin Lewis, who's quite well known over here, is suing Facebook because he constantly reports these sort of events, and Facebook says it takes them down. Sometimes it takes a little while, but he says he's got a team that constantly working on this just to report these kind of ads. And it does speak very much to some of the problems with Facebook's model, namely that they've been able to scale very quickly with not a huge amount of headcount because they automate so much.
So how has Facebook responded?
Well, it's sort of a classic Facebook response. They say we do not allow misleading or false ads on the website or on our platform. Well, that's patently not true because, of course, they are on the website. They are on the platform. And so, they're being slightly sort of mealy-mouthed, I would suggest. They actually place the onus on the user and anyone using Facebook's platform to report the ads rather than actively doing it themselves to the extent that they probably should.
Now, obviously, Facebook has been dealing with a lot here in the U.S. Also, Facebook executives are going to be testifying in the U.K. this week. Talk to us about what we are expecting.
So on Thursday, we'll see the Facebook CTO come to the House of Parliament, and he will answer questions for the Digital Media and Sports Select Committee. Now, this is significantly different from the way things worked on Capitol Hill a few weeks ago, where there were 2 days of questions, but each senator was allowed 5 minutes to question Mark Zuckerberg. Each member of the House was allowed 4 minutes to question him. In the House of Parliament, it will be very different. There are just 12 members of the Select Committee, and they have a sort of open-ended amount of time, meaning they will be able to ask really pointed follow-up questions and hopefully hold the executive to account if he's slightly evasive in the way that Zuckerberg was.
So, then what is the expectation? Is it new legislation? Obviously, GDPR, is already the ball is rolling there. What could we see from European regulators as a result of this testimony?
Well, I'm not sure we'll see so much as a result of the testimony. This is really about establishing what went wrong and whether they, we don't know whether they will actually then take actions as a consequence. The Select Committee in the UK, their job is basically to oversee the civil servants and then ensure the civil servants are doing their job properly. So this feeds into those kind of decisions. What will be interesting is seeing how European regulators start to see their role slightly differently. We saw today, for instance, that the European Commission is investigating Apple's acquisition of Shazam, the music recognition service. And their rationale for that was that it gives Apple too much data, potentially, on how people use music. Now, traditionally, we've seen the European regulators look at the consumer interest and pricing. Now, looking at access to data is a slight pivot there, and it will be interesting to see how then they use that approach when it comes to Facebook and, of course, to Google.
All right, Alex Webb of Bloomberg Gadfly. Alex, as always, thank you so much for stopping by. We are, of course, going to be covering those hearings later this week. Now, in case you missed HBO's Silicon Valley Sunday night, Bloomberg Technology made a little cameo with two of the stars of the show, Jared Dunn and Richard Hendricks. Here's a clip of what happened last night in episode 5.
Welcome. Today's a big day for you. Yeah. One day before Hulu announces their Box 3, you're coming out with a competing product. Tell me what your new internet is and why Gavin Belson should be afraid of it.
Manure.
Stay tuned for more of Silicon Valley this season and maybe another cameo. This is Bloomberg. We will be right back. Coming up, we're going to speak to the man behind the wheel at the Chinese startup Horizon Robotics, who's looking to dominate the market for driverless cars by 2030. Chinese startup Horizon Robotics is looking to dominate the market for driverless cars by 2030. The company is about to close a new round of financing that will raise several $100 million. In an exclusive interview, founder and CEO Yu Kai told Bloomberg the money will be spent on ramping up its research capabilities. Take a listen.
We expect to raise several $100 million. We're gonna have some new strategic investors. I think last year, probably we have Intel as our strategic investor, and this year we're gonna have another major player, semiconductor global player, which is not Intel. To be part of our team. We're also going to have some major leading OEMs, global and local, as our investors, right? So that's very exciting, yeah.
How do you compete with the likes of NVIDIA or Mobileye? What gives you the edge?
We actually targeted a totally new space, which is the artificial intelligence for autonomous driving cars. So that means we need to develop the technology, facilitating the computation, very efficient computation, low power consumption for perception, all the way to decision making, like a trajectory planning. So this is a totally open new space. In this new space, everyone has opportunity. Now we have like a global level competence for technology, and then we have a really challenging traffic situation, and we have a massive market, right? I think putting all the three factors together, we have a very full confidence to deliver, the cutting edge technology.
Facebook, Alibaba, they're also making moves into the chip sector.
Right.
How much of an impact is that likely to have?
Oh, that's extremely positive. That means I think people really push forward artificial intelligence. They need to think about to redefine and innovate the AI processors. I think that's great. That's great. I think Alibaba and Facebook, their primary focus is for the consumer type of business. Right, like selling the speakers, like the smart speakers to the customers.
So at this stage, it's not a direct threat to you?
No. I think we are doing something like a moonshot, right? And I think they are not doing things in that level, so we are not competing.
Whether or not the US decision to erect barriers to its tech assets makes your business proposition more compelling?
Yeah, I would say probably in reality, yes, because the Trump administration's decision probably will urge the China government to spend more money on the type of core technology oriented business.
Yeah. Do you see yourselves as being a key part of China's Made in China 2025 strategy?
I think what's essential for us is to be the leader. By 2025, 30 million cars in China equipped with our processors, and we're going to be the #1 player in that space. Just think about, by 2025, I think most of the cars, I think 70% of the cars will be equipped with AI processors. And Horizon Robotics is going to be the only player in China, right? I don't see any reason we cannot achieve the goal to be the market leader.
Horizon Robotics founder and CEO Yu Kai there, speaking exclusively with Bloomberg's Tom McKenzie in Beijing. Well, Walmart is on the verge of taking a majority stake in India's leading e-commerce company. According to people familiar with the matter, the world's largest retailer would spend at least $12 billion to buy up to 80% of Flipkart. The company's major investors are now on board. Earlier, they had considered a deal with Amazon. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Reminder, we're live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology weekdays, 5 p.m. New York, 2 p.m. San Francisco. That is all for now. This is Bloomberg.